Good afternoon, young pupils. We've been talking about experiencing strangers in the quest for public order. The final chapter before the midterm. And as always, I know you all get sick of hearing this, but make sure you see how this connects with the other chapters that we've been talking about and the other ideas. Again, don't just try to memorize information. Make sure that you really have a firm understanding of the concepts that we've been talking about throughout here. And when we talk about, strangers again, um, is framed within the model where the city is this really anonymous place full of strangers where nobody really knows each other. Nobody, there aren't personal connections. This is very contrasted with rural life, which is oftentimes imagined as being more intimate and personalized primary relationships. You can leave your door unlocked again for your neighbors to come on in because everybody knows each other. Far different from urban life as it's traditionally been characterized. As we talk about again, it's a false dichotomy, and this chapter kind of explores that, where again there is a lot more, a lot of anonymity and pockets. Again in the city like New York, where you have 12 million people, obviously, there are going to be a lot of people that you're going to miss making some more personalized connections with. But people come in contact with each other through the private, parochial, and then the public realm, more importantly. So in the public realm where they may not interact, individually, but at sporting events, museums, concerts, there still is a sense of community, if you will. Let's look at the functions of the public realm more closely. I'll leave this up for you all for a moment. Again, don't just take notes on what you're writing down here. That's not, utilizing your full critical thinking skills. Make sure you understand what you're writing down. We talked about again how the focus of the chapter is strangers in a big city, where you have all these anonymous people, but there's still a public realm. So, which much like you have in small rural towns, you may have a town square where everybody gathers. There's a public realm in cities as well that has 6 major functions. We'll talk about those in a moment. So again, we talk about the public realm. When you hear the word function, think of purpose. So what is the function of a telephone? What is the function of a screwdriver? What is the function of a plunger? So what is its purpose? So the purpose of the public realm, again, is an environment for learning, a place to enjoy respite and refreshments, communication center, and a place that allows to practice politics, the enacting of social arrangements, and the creation of cosmopolitans. Keep in mind, we talked about in the Chicago School chapter, the different ways you can experience the city. So one is cosmopolitans, where you have people that may really be into the arts and culture of a city. I think I absolutely will fall within this category. And one of the reasons I want to, I try and live, in or near big cities all my life is to be able to take advantage, different sporting events, concerts, festivals, and the like. So you can do that within the public realm of a big city. Again, it's you can have enactment of social arrangements and social conflicts. So again, whether it be protests like Black Lives Matter, or even protests on behalf of disgruntled Trump voters. In that vein, it allows for practice of politics. So you'll have a lot of political rallies in these public realms. Communication center, again, just to let people know all types of things that are going on within the city that they may not be familiar with otherwise. And again, we talk about, respite and refreshments. Just again, like I said, concerts, food, festivals, and an environment for learning about the city as well. So museums and things of that nature. So we talked about cosmopolitans before in the Chicago School chapter, and very quickly, again, you don't need to write down the entire quote, but just to give you some context what we mean here. By living in the city, people must become tolerant of others. In smaller communities, residents are not introduced to as much variety of the human condition in their whole lives as city dwellers may encounter in one day. So again, like, in smaller communities, we talked about before, again, see how these chapters connect together. That most individuals are homogenous. And when you hear that word homo, it means the same. So most people are the same. They do the same type of work. You have pretty much the same races, same, religious, beliefs, same structure and types of families. But in a big city, again, you're going to have to deal with some of everybody. And in doing that, it, in many cases forces a certain level of tolerance and understanding. Because again, people are going to have to be tolerant of you as well. That again, there are things that, you coming from a small town and people looking at you, like you're crazy. I think of like Louis Armstrong. Louis Armstrong was coming from New Orleans. But when he came up to, he talks about like when he came up to Chicago for the first time in the 1920s, people were looking at him like he was crazy and like, had to like, teach him how like, to quote unquote dress properly and things like that. So no matter where you're, coming from, you're going to be an outsider and there are going to be some things you're going to have to adjust to. And you hope that people will be tolerant for you during your adjustment. And over time, you become tolerant as well. And there are two types of tolerance, positive and negative. Let's look at very quickly the conditions for positive tolerance. For positive tolerance to occur, these are the things that need to be in place. First, the city needs to be predominantly a walking city, such as New York City. So again, as we talked about, even though there's a lot of public transportation and some people, minority of people will actually own automobiles, it's a city where you're going to, to get places, you're going to probably have to be on foot a lot. Even in getting off the train, the bus, you have to do quite a bit of walking. There are some cities like, so Los Angeles, for example, is more of a commuter type city. If you ain't got a car out there, it's a little bit tougher. LA does have a wide mass transportation system, including buses, trains. And again, in big cities, you have more and more people utilizing public transportation because, like LA being a perfect example, traffic is just, psychotic. So a lot of times just to get places quicker, I talked about before, and going to sporting events and things like that. And going to see my beloved Chicago Cubs, I never drive. It got to be something major going on. Like I made that mistake, maybe, in my 20s or something like that. And yeah, you'd be at Wrigley Field all damn afternoon, dog. Train still takes a long time, in terms of just massive humanity getting on to the train. But once you get the train loaded, boom, 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 no traffic. And in the midst of this, riding public transportation, you got to deal with all types of people. Homeless people, religious fanatics trying to like convert you, gang bangers, stick up kids. You got to be ready for all of it. Segregation must be small scale, meaning that again, like that in many cities, you have, the Hispanics living over here, the Italians living over there, the Jews living over here, the Black people living over there. So segregation of that type needs to be small scale, where again, people have to interact with people that are different from them. And there must be a hard edge to the human interaction. So like, no disrespect to, anybody from Las Vegas. I'm sure Las Vegas got its gangster parts, no question. Las Vegas was, actually founded by gangsters. So that's almost certainly true. But for the most part, dog, it's a real sanitized kind of like artificial city. Like, sorry, I don't know what to say. If you go to Las Vegas and if you go to other places such as, New Orleans or, Philadelphia or DC, you'll see the difference where just, it's a lot of manufactured things there in terms of the city, like we talked about, again, and all cities do this to an extent where, there's, such big business impetus in terms of getting people to spend money in these cities that you kind of have an amusement park type feel when you go to Las Vegas, in my opinion. Very overrated place. Has its moments, don't get me wrong, I've had some good times in Vegas. But as far as like, truly experiencing an urban environment, I'm not really sure it's that. There are challenges to the public realm. And again, keep in mind what these purposes of the public realm were. But there are some tremendous challenges. One of the biggest ones that you all can probably relate and speak to this more than most is technology. Is that increasing, like, again, like, so coming to concerts, coming to ball games, where you got to interact with people, riding the trains and stuff to some of these events. Like, I mean, people are just all on top of each other. Not always the most pleasant. Like I say, it can take a long time. So increasingly, particularly like, with the advent of like, the internet and all type of streaming services, a lot of times people feel more comfortable, like, just enjoying the spectacle from home as opposed to going out to an event, so Times Square, New York, as opposed to going out, let's just watch it at home. Although to be fair, I know quite a people from New York City, and almost nobody I know would actually participate in a Times Square, New York event, New Year's Eve event. But the point being that whether New York or otherwise, the technology allows us to kind of like, enjoy some of these things in a detached way that doesn't force us into the public realm as much as it did our parents and grandparents, where to get human interaction, you can just go on Facebook and Twitter. Tourism, again, I talked about this with Vegas, where more and more the public realm is being turned into a sanitized theme park. And rock with me here, young people, in terms of what we talked about before, of some of the problems with urbanization, that a lot of these cities would be really dirty and filthy, particularly when people first came there during the Industrial Revolution, because they just didn't plan, again, the urban planning chapter, they didn't plan adequately to be able to have that many people there. And, sanitation wasn't always the greatest. Places like New York, Chicago, you get a gang of rats and stuff. It's not very pretty. But it's authentic. As opposed to, hey, we're gonna so in this way, right? I'm not gonna say that if you go to if you go to New York and you go to Manhattan and you go to Times Square, it's dope. You'll have a great time. You ain't really been to New York though fully if you only do that. And Times Square for the most part, like, it's only mildly sanitized. Like, it's still dirty as hell compared to many big cities. But it's a little bit of a different feel than when you go into Brooklyn, the Bronx. Keep in mind, we talked about before, right? You got to be a hard edge for positive tolerance. You got to be a hard edge to human interaction, meaning that you got to see the good, the bad, and the ugly. And you got to learn to deal with that. Being in a sanitized, amusement park type city doesn't allow you to have that experience. It allows you to experience, the city, kind of in a safe, detached way. It's very different. I'm sorry, I'm all over the place here. So yeah, so again, the sanitized aspect, is very different where, you get to come and enjoy, Miami, you get to go on South Beach and all that, and that stuff is wonderful. Have a good time. But when we talk about urbanism and the urban mindset, that's not captured in South Beach. That's not captured in Times Square. That's not captured on the Magnificent Mile in Chicago. That's not captured strictly in the French Quarter in New Orleans. Like, you got to go into the hood a little bit. And related to the third point, timidity, a lot of people just ain't willing to do that. And I get it to a degree, I do. Again, people less likely to venture out into the unknown. You hear some of these tales about some of these cities, and we'll talk about New York in a moment. I'm sure you've heard all types of things about Chicago. Heard things about, New Orleans post Katrina. So people are just, not as willing and comfortable to venture out into, the unknown public realm. Again, so we have less, even in big city environments, increasingly we have less and less coming together. As because of these three factors, people are choosing to segregate themselves from the wider populations. We also talk about third place. So the TV show Cheers is way before y'all time. How about like, hopefully again, this won't totally lose y'all, but like Nipsey's on Martin. That would be like their water in the hole where they would go and have drinks and stuff, meet up with the crew in Detroit. So third places, your neighborhood spots, informal gathering places. These places are really important for urban environments. When we talk about, again, the breakdown of community, like keep in mind when we begin, right? The false dichotomy between the rural and the urban, that the rural, everybody's together, unified, you know your neighbor's name. City, again, everybody's anonymous. People are very, formal with one another. But through quote unquote third places, we find that that's not really true. And every city has, in every community, has a share of third places. Again, a spot where people do go to find that community. They talk about it here. Like I said, this is probably before y'all time. Mine is before y'all time too, but hopefully y'all will at least catch that reference. But there was a TV show in the 80s called Cheers. This was based in Boston. And one of the noteworthy catchphrases from the show, like one of the main characters, when he would come in, everybody would be like, "Norm!" So it shows that here in this big city, everybody knew this dude on a first name basis because he came into this third place of Cheers, their local bar and grill, that he came there so often that he was almost like family. Again, we see this in restaurants and like, in big cities, drugstore, hair salons, and barbershops. Again, in the film Barbershop, based in Chicago, where, Ice Cube's character, wanted, was tempted to, focus only on the business aspects of it. And as he really began to, think about it and unpack it, he saw how much it was just a huge part of the community itself. It was more than just a barbershop. It's a place where people grew up and people, may not have had like, a father in a home, but they had father figures at the barbershop. Place where you, talk, crap about the game the night before. You might learn about, women. May not always learn the right things, but you will learn things. So places like that, again, very important. Coffee shops, again, like, so I wasn't really into Friends and stuff like that in the 90s, but I know that their hangout spot was a coffee shop. But whatever show you may, prefer, I'm not sure how much they do this with reality TV today, but you probably have seen shows where outside of the main characters' homes, there probably is a spot where people hang out and you get fellowship and like, community there in a way that, you can duplicate kind of their rural feel. And again, people interact there on the virtue of their name, not their title. Again, the urban environment, please make sure you're listening. The urban environment is oftentimes, it's like, okay, what do you do for a living? And that determines how people treat you in an urban environment as opposed to in a rural environment. It's supposed to be like, okay, who's your family? Like, whose son are you? Who's your children? So your family name will be important. In these third places, again, that's true as well. So you may have like, so in Cheers, for example, you got like, cast mailman, you got lawyers, former athletes, all working within this environment, but within there, they're on equal footing. Again, same type of deal, like, in Nipsey's on Martin. But you have all these different people, including folks like Tommy, who ain't got no job, man. But you see here in all these contexts, right, that people are able to interact. Like I know, like in the barbershop in Charlotte I went to, it was probably 2-3 years before anybody knew like that I was like, a PhD, because in the barbershop, like it never came up. It was never important for what the things we were talking about. which would generally be the Cowboys, unfortunately. That was the main topic that everybody wanted to have a damn discussion about. Women, of course, rap music, politics. So only later did it come out, hey, this is XYZ. And I think probably somebody else like had to tell the group. It's not important in this third place. But the city is, in many ways, through construction of highways, is eliminating many third places. Where the way they construct, the cities are designed, the way that they, again, the urban planning processes in modern times has really kind of shut a lot of these places down. One of my great disappointments every time I seem to go home is that more and more of the third places that I grew up with, seem to be shutting down. And those things are problematic, particularly in a city like Chicago where you have a lot of crime. Those places where people can kind of chill and interact are really important. The cosmopolitan canopy, again, speaks to the involvement and trust in everyday urban civility that's demanded in some of these cities. Again, you have some really racially, ethnically, and socially diverse places due to the Industrial Revolution and subsequent globalization of the late 20th and early 21st century. The bad side of that is that, in some pockets, people are becoming more detached. You are having more segregation. But again, there are things that the cities can do to combat this. So again, one of the things it talks about, right, is that, we talked about urbanism. When it talks about the point there about Black males and the blasé attitude where you almost have to, and again, this has been like carefully researched in a way that it's very subconscious. You almost have to leave your home every day in a place like New York, a place like Boston, and you got to put on a protective shell. Like where nobody sees your emotions, nobody sees what you're thinking. You're just kind of like in this madness going on around you, and you're detached from it all. They talk about strangers are neutralized. So like, again, the whole notion of like walking down the street and like, people waving from their houses and speaking to people that you don't know, it just was, earth-shattering to me. And I've been in the South many times, but it still took me off guard to see this happen so routinely. Because again, there's like not a lot of eye contact in places like Chicago. People will look at each other, but eye contact, like it often means something. You'll look at somebody long enough just to let them know that, you're not a punk. But if you hold your eye contact too long, that can be viewed as like, hostility. And those things, again, can escalate very quickly. But there must be some level of civility. Like in the process, again, oftentimes these places are looked at as very just hostile and people are just gruff and just, shooting each other over nothing. In many ways, it's the exact opposite. That in some ways, I've seen more crazed, just unprovoked disrespect in some of the southern cities than I have, like, in a place like Chicago, because if you disrespect somebody in a place like Chicago, and I think, again, this is true in, many places all across the country, so I don't want to make like that Chicago is unique in this regard, but I know for sure this is true there. In that if you have like beef or tension, like you need to really be sure that you mean it. Because things, again, like, can go sideways very, very quickly. So since everybody knows and understands that, it kind of creates a certain level like a respect where, again, like so even misinterpretations of disrespect can be greeted very rudely. So people learn very quickly to try and deal with each other with a certain level of respect. But again, it's important that these spaces are authentic in ways that allow people to break some of these things down where, again, you may see some kids that are different from you, but you don't like, again, get automatically scared or fearful. You have to force yourself into those authentic spaces to kind of be like, create that type of sentiment organically. We talked about, again, the divide before between the rural and the urban. The rural, where again, people, small communities, everybody knows each other. If something is out of place, that comes to the attention of your neighbors a lot more quickly. People are much more willing to help each other. Is the view in smaller cities compared to, the every man and woman for him and herself model that's oftentimes portrayed in big cities. In one of the landmark incidents that really kind of crystallized this false dichotomy was Kitty Genovese, who was killed in Queens, New York in 1964. In this way, so Kitty, just very quickly, she was walking through Queens late at night. A man grabbed her, began to stab, and consequently rape her. She's screaming, "Oh my God, help, 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 help." It's like 2, 3 in the morning. Nobody came to her rescue. The dude stopped for a little bit, thinking somebody's going to come. Nobody came. He went back in for more and continued to stab and sexually assault this woman, and she screamed for more help. I want to say all of this took the better part of an hour, her screaming throughout. No one came to help Kitty Genovese, and she eventually died. Many people, this sent shockwaves all across the nation, where it was believed that this would just display the callous, inhumane nature of the urbanized mindset. That everybody is just so much into their own things. Everybody's so self-absorbed. You have such a breakdown in community where everybody just looked at Kitty Genovese and like, hey, I don't know that woman. Hey, it's not my problem. Whereas in a big city, in a small town, it would feel more like your problem and you probably would know her. So the Kitty Genovese case was used as kind of like a microcosm that shows just how dangerous and callous the urban environment was and is. And while that may be so, it's also important to note the main reason why, because like later reports, they said that several people, again, they heard her, they cut their lights on to see what was going on. So maybe at least 50, 60 people did this. But nobody called the police or went to help her themselves. And what they came to find out is that it wasn't just a bunch of selfish, detached people. Some may have been, but a lot of it was that they assumed that somebody else was going to call the police. Now, what is so it's not true that people are just callous. Like, people do heroic things to help each other in big cities all the time. We saw this with 9/11, where many people, again, that same New York City, where many people ran into buildings to try and save, folks, helping people out like they didn't know that day, not just the firefighters and, other first responders, but just regular New Yorkers looking out and helping each other. We see this, again, time and time again. I'm trying to think of the major rainstorm, not quite tornado, hurricane that they got a few years back. And we saw similar type events. We saw this during COVID. So it's not so much that people are just, callous and don't, are inhumane in these spaces. But it is that, the mindset was, okay, it's somebody's job to do this. That I'm not a policeman, I'm not a fireman. So if in a small town, yes, we may all try and if we see the neighbor's house out, we'll call the fire department, but we may also start to pitch in before they get there. And it's not happening in the city. You better wait for the fire. And the fire company will want you to wait, wait for that. So again, keep these things in mind. We try and we often try and paint human beings in groups in very black and white sketches, but there's usually a lot of gray matter there. Because again, as we talked about, right, the urban dweller has constantly been bombarded by multiple stimuli. if you're gonna respond to everything, because best believe, as messed up as Kenny Genevieve's situation was, if you responded, and this may sound awful, you can't possibly respond to every cry for help in a place like New York. You just can't. You may get yourself killed, you may get yourself harmed. And there are a lot of cries out for help. The urban dweller is not going to be able to respond to everything. Over a short time, they develop an ability to select out certain stimuli and ignore others. And many, not all, adapt by totally disregarding the needs, interests, and demands of those who one is not defined as relevant to the satisfaction of personal needs. So again, this is an overstatement, and I believe, I know this is true of many people in rural environments as well. But yes, this environment will make it that you cannot, it's too many people, can't deal with everybody's needs and interests. You're not gonna again, walk to the train, 50 people are gonna ask you for something. Sign this petition. Can I get $1 for this? Can we get, do you wanna try this? I know. Again, it kind of forces this type of mentality on you after a while. Otherwise, again, you will never get on with your day. It does raise the question of where does civic responsibility lie? And oftentimes, again, so it's not that people are just cowards, but there does become a norm of non-involvement. This is not, again, just because people are mean and nasty. If you got involved with everything that you came in contact with in New Orleans, you would not have time to keep up with your own affairs. Yeah, you got to put on the shell, go out into the world. Me, myself, almost always, I would have my headphones on. There ain't nothing else going around. Too much other stuff to take in. I got to, again, amongst these 8 million people, I have to find a way to create my own world for myself. And again, there's a right of emotional and social privacy. That even though when it's a big environment, I have a right also still to be left alone. Because again, if everybody get involved, this is why we got police, we got firemen, we got social workers. Those are the people that are tasked with maintaining the social order. We don't need no George Zimmermans where you got to play vigilante. We see what happens with stuff like that, right? So imagine in a big city environment. Again, the notion that everybody's just like totally heartless will be short-sighted and intellectually inaccurate. Couple more things before we go. I want to talk about streetwise. I want to get into this in deep, so I'm going to leave this up for just a moment for you all. So one of the things we've been talking about throughout, again, is urbanism, again, which is the mindset that develops from, living in the city. This mindset develops if, obviously if you've been living there your whole life. But even again, some of you all here now, if you go and live in New York, the way that you view the world, the way that you approach the city, if you live there for 10, 20 years, you're going to be transformed a bit. And one of the things it talks about is that, becoming streetwise, very important in the big city. There are several elements of this, as you see. And one of them is hyper ghetto. And again, this is not like, a slang term. This is a social scientific term. There's a specific term for a ghetto. Like, again, we hear this phrase a lot. But again, it's oftentimes just, again, a place of a city that's really isolated from the central business of the city. Hyper ghettos, again, are that on steroids. It's extreme segregation by both class and race. So ghettos, a lot of times you may have like, okay, where this is where you have the poor people residing, the poorest side of town. Hyper ghetto, it is the poorest and usually the blackest, sometimes the brownest place in the town. We'll talk about going forward why that can be problematic. Because having one race of people, like having like a black neighborhood in and of itself is not problematic. Please don't mistake that. But with the economics, that's what really causes a lot of the problems. You don't have as many businesses that come into those neighborhoods. You don't have like the schools usually aren't as high quality. The housing itself is not the greatest quality. There's going to be more crime because there's more poverty and not businesses that are going to attract jobs. This is very different. Again, like, most black communities throughout history, like, have been, segregated, but you would have a doctor, a dentist, a pimp, a prostitute, a school teacher, a clergyman, all living in one neighborhood community. And in that way, you could, like, the value system would be very diverse and robust, like city itself. When you have a hyper ghetto type situation, it really isolates the poverty and the values. And much like we talked about in England, in Manchester, in the early chapters, the emergence of cities, where again, they designed their cities where, the regal gentry did not have to even interact with the poor people. Many of our cities are becoming like this as well. We also see, like, the diminished influence of older heads in these areas where, again, like a lot of the older black men oftentimes are almost wholly absent from some of these communities. This creates a situation where a certain set of rules that are called, again, there's a book by this title by Elijah Anderson, Code of the Streets, that really speaks to this. And he spoke about this in Philadelphia, where there are informal rules and rituals that govern people's behavior to survive in the ghetto. And this is true whether you're talking about the ghetto of Columbia, the ghetto of Atlanta, the ghetto of Charlotte, that these rules hold true almost always. Again, being able to, like, like we make light of how, like, when something bad may happen and black people will know how to get out of there. A lot of that comes from, like, just being aware of when tensions are rising and being able to read that. Being able to understand, when you're in a certain gang territory and what's going on at the time of that gang territory. So coming in and knowing, like, okay, you got to wear your hat straight over here, man. It doesn't matter if you don't know that rocking it, one way or the other will make you affiliated with this gang or that gang. So knowing those rules are really important. There's a street etiquette, again, a coping strategy that involves avoiding strange black males, and that's even by black males. And there's street wisdom, again, just being able to make distinctions about your speech, your clothing, your behavior, that allow a deeper understanding of different types of people, again, where for the most part, my diction, the way I speak, is the same in all circles. But I definitely want to be mindful, again, of I'm not going to dumb myself down if I'm in a hood, but I don't necessarily need to sound too professorial either. Next time, after the midterm, we'll talk about seeing disorder and the ecology of fear. Please, again, keep in mind all the things we talked about leading up to this point and get ready for Wednesday's exam.